Many thanks for that live report. Appreciate it. Yan Liang is the Kremer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University and Senior Fellow at Boston University's Global Development Policy Center. She joins me now from Portland, Oregon. Appreciate you being with us.
Good to be with you.
So what are you expecting to come out of this historic high-stakes summit between Presidents Trump and Xi in the midst of the Iran war and with other top issues also on the agenda, including Taiwan, trade and, of course, AI?
Yeah, so I think Porter pointed out, this is a very symbolic, high-level, face-to-face meeting between the two leaders. And as you remember, last time when Trump visited, that was in 2017. So many things have changed in the past 9 years, especially in the last year and a half. So I think the two leaders have a lot to talk about, and this kinds of face-to-face communication is very important. So I think just the fact that Trump is going to China, I think that makes a lot of significance. And as you also mentioned, to talk about. Of course, Iran war will be part of the topic, but I think the bilateral relationships will still be the focus of this talk. So as you mentioned, Taiwan, tech, and trade, the 3 Ts, I think will really be the focal points. And so I don't think there's a lot of deliverables, as your reporter also, I think, rightly points out. But even just China pledges more agricultural purchases, also energies and airplanes, all of this would then allow Trump to come back home to boast, right, that his wins. And I think that is super important for his political base as, very close to the midterm election.
And President Trump says he doesn't need any help from President Xi to end the Iran war, but with a ceasefire falling apart and negotiations stalled, what help could China potentially offer to end the conflict by getting Iran back to the negotiating table to sign a nuclear deal perhaps and open up the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I actually think that President Trump could use a lot of help right now. As we know, the military maneuver with Iran is not really going well for the United States. Washington Post has just recently reported that Iran very much still retain over 70% of its missiles and 75% of its mobile launches. And the Strait of Hormuz is still being closed. And the U.S. inflation just in April has risen to 3.8% compared to 3.3% the month before. So I think, the Trump would really want to end the war, and it really wants to, have the visible sort of the wins to show to both domestic bases and also, to Israel. So I think he will want to have some more help from China, and China definitely is in a position, in a way, to play a positive role, which is what they have been consistently saying. They do want to help to put an end to this war. As you know, China is the largest, right, importers of Iran's oil, close to 90% of the total Iran oil exports. And China is also Iran's comprehensive strategic partner since 2021. Iran is part of the China-led BRICS and also SCO. So I think in a way, China does have a lot of persuasive power, has a lot of influences on Iran. But that said, it's hard for China to promise anything because Iran, of course, has its own existential threat due to this military attack. So I think Iran has its own calculations, but I think China will try, to play a positive role to again put an end to this war.
So overall, what do both sides want to get out of this high-stakes summit, and what will they likely get in the end?
Well, stability. I think stability or stabilizing the relationships between the two countries is really the highest goal of this meeting. So as we know, last year in 2025, there has been escalation of the tariff war between the two sides. At the peak, I think the U.S. had 145% tariff rate on China, and China reciprocated with 125% tariff. And so it turned out this is really a lose-lose situation. That's why both sides reached agreement at the Busan meeting to have a tariff truce, which expired by November this year. So I think at least these two sides would talk about how to manage the kind of trade relationships, how to adjust the imbalances, how China could work with the United States to remove some of these tariff restrictions, which is what China is really that China really wants. But again, I think there's a lot of structural issues that will not be completely resolved in this just one meeting. So I think both sides will try to, first of all, achieve some deliverables. Like I mentioned earlier, China has been purchasing U.S. soybeans, 12 million metric tons. That have been the target has been met by early January. But of course, China, would probably promise to purchase more, probably 25 million tons by the end of this year, which is still, a possibility, but it would be difficult because China's strategic, stockpile of the soybean right now is actually quite high. But anyway, I think that some of these lower level deliverables, right? China's pledges of purchase energies, China used to purchase 4 million tons of LNGs in 2024, but that drastically reduced last year because of the tariff war. So I think China could increase the purchase of the US LNGs and other petrochemicals. And finally, airplanes. I think that there has been a lot of talk about 500 possible, 737 MAX Boeing airplanes and some other wide-body planes. So I think those are really tangible deliverables, which again, as I said, it would allow Trump to come back home with some sort of, deals that could show to his political base.
Yan Liang, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. A senior